The emergency lights flashed red across the dark bridge of the Starweaver, casting shadows that made Kira's scaled skin shimmer. She gripped her workstation as another tremor shook the research vessel. The ship's engine had failed catastrophically, leaving them stranded in the cold void between star systems. Status report. Kira called out to her fellow crew members, her tail twitching with anxiety. The Viridian research team had never faced such a serious situation before. Their species was relatively new to deep space travel, and their vessel, while adequate for research, wasn't built for emergencies. The main screen flickered, showing critical damage to their primary drive system. Sparks flew from a nearby console as another system failed. The ship's atmosphere remained stable, but without engine power, they would eventually lose life support. Sending emergency signals on all frequencies, announced First Officer Trell, his normally bright green scales now pale with worry. Targeting all known spacefaring species in range. Kira watched the communications display, hope rising as the first responses began arriving. That hope quickly turned to dismay as she read each message. The Centaurians. Vessel too primitive. Not worth resource expenditure. The Arcturus Alliance. Region outside our jurisdiction. Request denied. The Syrian Collective. Cannot assist lesser species. Maintain radio silence. Message after message arrived, each a rejection. Each advanced species they contacted either ignored them or dismissed their plea outright. Kira felt her heart sink. Their people had always looked up to these advanced civilizations, but now... News signal detected, Trell suddenly announced, his voice carrying a mix of surprise and confusion. It's different from the others. The main screen lit up with a new message. The language was unfamiliar, but their translators quickly adapted. This is Captain Robert Mason of the Earth vessel Endeavour. We've received your distress call and are altering course to assist. Hold position. ETA 43 minutes. Please respond to confirm message received. Earth vessel. Kira exchanged confused looks with her crew. I've never heard of their species. Checking database, one of her science officers reported. Found them. They're called humans. They're a relatively new spacefaring race, only achieved FTL travel 50 years ago. Kira's first instinct was to reject help from such a young species. After all, if the advanced civilizations couldn't or wouldn't help them, what could these newcomers do? But another violent shudder through the ship made the decision for her. Send confirmation, she ordered, and thank them. The next 43 minutes were tense. The crew worked to maintain critical systems, while Kira researched everything their database had on humans. There wasn't much, mostly trade reports and brief diplomatic contacts. They were classified as a developing species with unusual behavioral patterns. When the Endeavour arrived, Kira's breath caught in her throat. The human ship was smaller than she expected, but it moved with surprising grace. Its design was different from anything she'd seen before, less elegant than Centaurian ships, but somehow more purposeful. The main screen activated, showing the human bridge. Kira found herself facing a human female with short brown hair and kind eyes. Dr. Emily Brooks, their xenobiologist. Starweaver, this is Endeavour, Emily spoke clearly. We see you've lost engine power and have significant damage to your outer hull. We're preparing a rescue team. Captain Mason is coordinating with our engineers to find the safest way to help you. You're really going to help us? Kira couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. Even though we're strangers, even though our technology is less advanced than yours. The human woman's expression showed confusion, then understanding, then something Kira would later learn was called determination. Of course we're going to help. You're in trouble, you asked for help, and we can provide it. That's all that matters. Behind Emily, Kira could see the human crew moving with practiced efficiency. Captain Mason, a tall human male with graying hair, was already organizing his team. Their faces showed focus and resolve, not the disdain or indifference the other species had shown. Begin emergency docking procedures. Captain Mason's voice carried clearly through the communication channel. Dr. Brooks, prepare the medical bay for possible casualties. Lieutenant Turner, get your rescue team ready. We've got lives to save, people. Let's move. As Kira watched the humans spring into action, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope, yes, but also something more. These humans, this young species that barely had starships, were doing what the most advanced civilizations had refused to do. They were coming to help. Lieutenant Michael Turner checked his rescue suit one last time as the Endeavor's docking tube extended toward the disabled Viridian ship. Behind him, Dr. Amanda Wells organized her medical kit, her movements quick but careful. The rescue team waited in the airlock, each member focused on their role. Remember, Captain Mason's voice came through their comms. We don't know much about their biology or ship design. Stay alert and careful. Copy that, Captain, Michael responded, watching the docking tube's progress. The Viridian ship looked strange to human eyes. Its hull had an almost organic quality, with curves and patterns that seemed to flow like water. Dr. Emily Brooks stood next to Michael, her tablet displaying everything they knew about Viridian physiology, which wasn't much. They're reptilian, but their body temperature runs much warmer than Earth reptiles. Watch out for their tails. They use them for balance, and might swing them when stressed. The docking tube made contact with a soft thud. Green lights flashed, showing a good seal. Michael took a deep breath and opened the airlock. The first thing that struck him was the heat. The Viridian ship was much warmer than human comfort levels. Sweat immediately began to bead on his forehead, but his suit's cooling system kicked in quickly. 3 Viridians waited on the other side. Their scales shimmered under the emergency lighting, and their large eyes reflected light like a cat's. The one in front, Kira, according to the briefing, stepped forward cautiously. "Welcome aboard the Starweaver," she said, her translator making the words sound slightly mechanical. We're grateful for your help." Emily stepped forward, her friendly smile visible through her clear faceplate. "We're glad we could come. I'm Dr. Brooks. This is Lieutenant Turner and Dr. Wells. We have more team members ready to help once we assess the situation." Michael noticed how the Viridians watched their every move, their tails swaying slightly. He recognized the look in their eyes. He'd seen it before in rescue operations. It was the look of people who couldn't quite believe help had actually arrived. "Your engine room," Michael said, keeping his voice calm and professional. "Can you show us?" As they moved through the ship, Michael's trained eye took in every detail. The damage was worse than they'd initially thought. Power conduits hung from the ceiling, and several corridors were sealed off due to hull breaches. "We tried to fix it ourselves," one of the Viridian engineers explained, leading them to the engine room. "But our technology, it's not as advanced as what other species use. We couldn't." "Hey," Michael interrupted gently. "Sometimes the newest tech isn't the answer. Sometimes you need old-fashioned ingenuity and hard work. Let's see what we're dealing with." The engine room was a mess of twisted metal and burned-out systems, but under the damage, Michael could see the basics of the drive system. Different design, same principles. He clicked his comm. "Captain, we're going to need the full engineering team and about 6 hours. It's bad, but it's fixable." "Copy that, Lieutenant." "Dr. Wells, how are the crew members?" Amanda had been scanning the Viridians with her medical equipment. Some minor injuries, signs of stress, but nothing critical. "Their biology is fascinating, Captain. Their healing rate is remarkable." Throughout the inspection, Michael noticed how the Viridians watched them with increasing curiosity. Finally, one of them, a younger crew member, asked the question they'd all been thinking. "Why did you come?" The others, "They said we weren't worth saving." The human team members exchanged glances. It was Emily who answered, her voice firm. "Where we come from, if someone needs help and we can provide it, we help. It doesn't matter who they are or what technology they have. It's that simple." "But you risked your own ship," another Viridian pointed out. "Your own lives." Calculated risk, Michael said with a slight smile. We're pretty good at those. Now let's get your engine running again. Dr. Wells, can you set up a medical station here? Captain, we're ready for the engineering team. As the rest of the human crew began arriving through the docking tube, bringing equipment and supplies, Kira watched in amazement. These humans moved with purpose and confidence, but there was something else too. A warmth in their interactions, a readiness to smile or offer a reassuring word. Your species, she said quietly to Emily, you're different from the others we've met. Emily paused in her work. Different isn't always bad, she replied. Sometimes being different is exactly what's needed. Above them, the emergency lights continued to pulse, but somehow they didn't seem quite as ominous anymore. Help hadn't just arrived. Hope had arrived with it. The engine room of the Starweaver buzzed with activity as human and Viridian crews worked side by side. Captain Mason watched from the doorway as Lieutenant Turner directed the repair efforts, his voice steady despite the rising heat in the chamber. Easy with that power coupling, Michael called out, wiping sweat from his forehead. These connections are different from ours, but they're just as delicate. The humans had stripped down to their basic cooling suits, while the Viridians moved comfortably in the heat. Dr. Emily Brooks stood nearby, rapidly documenting the differences between human and Viridian technology on her tablet. Your species adapts quickly, Kira observed, watching as the humans modified their tools to work with Viridian systems. We didn't expect this level of creativity. Emily smiled. Humans have a long history of making things work with whatever we have on hand. We call it improvising. A shower of sparks erupted from a nearby panel, causing several crew members to jump back. Michael rushed forward, toolkit in hand. Power surge. Everyone okay? The containment field is failing, a Viridian engineer shouted, his scales darkening with stress. We can't hold it. Captain Mason's voice cut through the panic. Turner, what do you need? We need to stabilize that field, but our equipment isn't compatible, Michael replied, his mind racing. Wait. Dr. Brooks, you said their power systems run on similar principles to our old fusion plants, right? Emily nodded quickly. Yes, but... Captain, Michael interrupted. Remember that museum piece we were transporting? The 21st century fusion stabilizer. Mason's eyes widened. The antique. You think it'll work? Their tech might be different, but physics is physics. Sometimes older is better. Do it, Mason ordered. The next few minutes were intense. Human crew members sprinted back to the Endeavour to retrieve the old stabilizer, while Michael and the Viridian engineers worked to keep the systems from completely failing. Dr. Wells stood ready with medical supplies, worried about radiation exposure. When the stabilizer arrived, it looked primitive compared to the sleek Viridian technology. The Viridian crew watched with a mixture of doubt and hope as Michael and his team worked to connect it. This device, one of the Viridian engineers said, it's so basic. Basic isn't always bad, Michael replied, making final adjustments. Sometimes the simple solutions are the best ones. Ready? Activating now. The old stabilizer hummed to life. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the warning lights began to fade. The dangerous energy readings dropped to safe levels. The containment field stabilized. A cheer went up from both human and Viridian crews. Michael grinned, patting the old stabilizer. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. As the crisis passed, the repair work continued with renewed energy. The humans taught the Viridians about their older but reliable technology, while the Viridians shared their knowledge of advanced systems. It was a strange but effective combination of old and new. Your people, Kira said to Emily later as they watched the crew's work. You don't just help. You teach. You share. Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded, Emily replied. The more we share, the more we all learn. Captain Mason approached them, looking tired but satisfied. The engine repairs are at 60%. We should have you mobile within a few hours. Lieutenant Turner's team is already teaching your engineers how to maintain the modifications. The other species, Kira said softly, they would never have shared their knowledge like this. They guard their technology jealously. Mason shrugged. That's not our way. Besides, these repairs are temporary. You'll need to reach a proper shipyard for permanent fixes. We're just helping you help yourselves. As the work continued, something unexpected began to happen. The Viridian crew started sharing their own knowledge, little tricks they'd developed, insights into their technology. The humans listened eagerly, taking notes and asking questions. Look at them, Emily said to Mason, watching the two species work together. This is more than just a rescue now. It usually is, Mason replied with a smile. Every time we help someone, we learn something new. That's how humanity has always grown. The engine room, once a scene of crisis, had become a place of learning and cooperation. The emergency lights had been replaced by proper illumination, and the sound of worried voices had given way to technical discussions and even occasional laughter. As Michael demonstrated a repair technique to a group of fascinated Viridian engineers, he reflected that this was what humanity did best, not just fixing problems, but building bridges, sharing knowledge, and turning disasters into opportunities for growth. The warning came without notice. One moment, both ships were steady in space as the repair work continued. The next, all sensors began blaring. Solar flare detected. Lieutenant Turner shouted from his position at the Starweaver's newly repaired monitoring station. Massive radiation wave incoming. Captain Mason's voice crackled over the comm system. All crews, return to stations immediately. Endeavor, prepare for emergency maneuvers. But Emily Brooks, still working with the Viridian science team, quickly spotted a problem. Captain, the Starweaver's shields aren't fully operational yet. They won't survive a direct hit. The solar flare was massive, far larger than any normal space weather event. The radiation would tear through the Viridian ship's weakened defenses like paper. They had less than 10 minutes before impact. Can we outrun it? Kira asked, her scales pale with worry. Michael shook his head. Not with your engines at partial power. You'd need at least an hour to get to safe distance. Captain Mason's face appeared on the main screen, his expression grim but determined. Dr. Brooks, what if we position the Endeavor between the flare and the Starweaver? Our shields are at full strength. Sir, the Endeavor's shield operator cut in. Even our shields might not hold against something this size. We could lose the ship. A heavy silence fell over both crews. The humans looked to their captain, waiting for his decision. The Viridians watched in disbelief. Surely these humans wouldn't risk their own destruction to save strangers. Mason's voice was firm. Lieutenant Turner, coordinate with the Endeavor's helm. Position us directly between the Starweaver and that flare. Dr. Wells, get all medical teams ready. Both ships might need them. Captain, Kira protested, you can't. Your ship is my responsibility. Mason finished. Just like your crew is yours. We're not leaving you to die out here. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. The Endeavor moved into position, its larger bulk completely shielding the Viridian vessel. Human crew members worked frantically to reinforce their shields, redirecting every spare bit of power they could find. Emily stayed aboard the Starweaver, working with Kira to strengthen what defenses they had. Through the viewing ports, they could see the Endeavor's hull beginning to glow as the first waves of radiation reached them. Why? Kira asked softly. Why risk everything for us? Emily's hands never stopped moving as she worked. Because it's the right thing to do. Because every life is worth saving. Because this is who we are. The main wave hit with devastating force. The Endeavor shuddered violently, its shields blazing bright enough to blind. Warning systems screamed as the radiation levels spiked. Hull temperature critical. Shield power dropping. Structural integrity at 60%. But Captain Mason's voice remained steady. Hold position. Redirect power from non-essential systems. We are not moving. The Viridians watched in awe as the human ship took the full force of the solar flare. The Endeavor's hull glowed cherry red, then white-hot, but it didn't move an inch. "Shield failure imminent," someone shouted. "Reroute emergency power," Mason ordered. "Everything we've got." The minutes seemed to last forever. Inside the Starweaver, human and Viridian crew members worked together to maintain what systems they could, watching helplessly as their protectors endured the fury of space itself. Finally, mercifully, the radiation levels began to drop. The solar flare passed, leaving both ships floating in its wake. The Endeavor was scorched and damaged, its once pristine hull now bearing the scars of its sacrifice. But it had held. Both ships had survived. As damage reports began coming in, Kira approached Captain Mason's image on the screen. You could have died. All of you, just to save us." Mason's tired face broke into a small smile. "That's what humans do, Kira. We protect those who need protection. We help those who need help. It's not about calculating odds or measuring worth. It's about doing what's right." Emily looked around the Starweaver's bridge, seeing the impact of Mason's words on the Viridian crew's faces. They were seeing something they'd never seen before. A species that would risk everything not for profit or obligation, but simply because they believed it was right. "Captain," Kira said formally, "the Viridian people will never forget what humanity did here today." "Just pay it forward," Mason replied. "Next time someone needs help, remember this day. That's all we ask." Both ships limped through space toward the nearest station, their crews working tirelessly to maintain systems damaged by the solar flare. Chief Engineer Jack Thompson moved between repair teams on the Endeavor, his face streaked with grease as he directed the recovery efforts. "How bad is it, Chief?" Captain Mason asked, surveying the damage to his ship's engines. "Could be worse, sir," Jack replied, checking readings on his tablet. "Shield generators are fried, and the outer hull needs serious work, but we saved the core systems. Those old Earth metals really held together." On the bridge, Communications Officer Lisa Martinez monitored the approaching station's signals. Her console crackled with incoming messages from various species, all suddenly very interested in what had happened. "Sir," she called to Mason, "we're getting calls from 6 different species now, including some that ignored the Viridian distress signal earlier." Mason's face hardened slightly. "Tell them we'll provide a full report after both ships are safely docked." Meanwhile, aboard the Starweaver, Lieutenant Turner and Dr. Brooks continued working with the Viridian crew. The humans were teaching them emergency repair techniques, showing them how to maintain the hybrid systems they created during the rescue. "Your methods are so different," a Viridian engineer said, watching Michael patch a power relay using what looked like primitive materials. "But they work so well. Sometimes the simple solutions are the best," Michael replied, demonstrating the technique again. "This patch will hold until you reach a proper repair facility." Emily was in another section, helping Dr. Wells treat injuries from the crisis. The medical bay had become a place of cultural exchange, with both species learning about each other's biology and healing practices. "Your bodies heal differently than ours," Amanda explained to a group of fascinated Viridians. "But the principles of trauma care are universal. Here, let me show you a technique we developed on Earth." As they approached the space station, Kira joined Captain Mason on a video call to discuss their arrival. The station authorities seemed unsure how to handle the unusual pair of ships, especially when they learned what had happened. "The other species at the station are quite interested in our story," Kira said after the call ended. "They've never seen anything like this before." "Like what?" Mason asked, though he had a good idea what she meant. "A more advanced species risking everything to save a less advanced one. Teaching them instead of just helping and leaving. Treating us as equals." Kira's scales shimmered with emotion. "It goes against everything they believe about how the galaxy works." The station came into view, a massive structure gleaming in the starlight. Ships of various species moved around it, many slowing or changing course to get a better look at the unusual pair of vessels approaching. "Look at their hull," Lisa reported, relaying comments from passing ships. "The Endeavor's damage pattern. They're realizing what we did to protect the Starweaver." Jack Thompson's team had managed to restore enough power for basic maneuvering, but both ships still needed help to dock. The station extended emergency guidance beams to assist them. As they made their final approach, Kira gathered her crew to make an announcement. The humans present on her ship stood to the side, watching curiously. "Today," she said, her voice carrying clearly through both ships' comm systems, "we learned something important. We learned that true advancement isn't measured by technology or power. It's measured by what you're willing to do for others, by your willingness to help those in need, to share knowledge, to risk everything for strangers." She turned to face the humans. "You showed us what real civilization looks like. Not the cold efficiency of the advanced species who ignored us, but the warm heart of a younger race who saw fellow beings in trouble and simply helped." Captain Mason's voice responded from the Endeavor. "That's humanity for you. We're young. We're sometimes rough around the edges. But we know what matters. And what matters isn't how advanced you are. It's how you treat others." As both ships finally docked at the station, repair crews and medical teams standing by, the news of what had happened was already spreading. Other species watched in confusion and growing interest as human and Viridian crews worked together to secure their vessels, sharing tools, knowledge, and friendly words. "You know," Emily said to Michael as they helped secure the docking clamps, "I think we did more than just save a ship today." Michael nodded, watching the mixture of species gathering to observe them. "We showed them a different way. Maybe a better way." And in the crowded station, word began to spread of the humans, the young species who came when no one else would, who risked everything to save strangers, and who might just be changing how things worked in this part of the galaxy. The space station's main conference room had never been so crowded. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the large table, their attention focused on Captain Mason and Kira as they finished explaining the events of the past few days. The station's administrator, a tall being from an ancient species, leaned forward. "Let me understand this clearly. You humans deliberately put your more advanced vessel in harm's way to protect a less developed ship, and then shared your technical knowledge with them." "That's correct," Mason replied simply. "It was the right thing to do." Murmurs filled the room. A representative from the Centaurian delegation, one of the species that had ignored the original distress call, spoke up. "This goes against all established protocols. Lesser developed species must advance on their own to prove their worth." Dr. Emily Brooks, sitting next to Mason, couldn't stay quiet any longer. "With respect, who decides what makes a species worthy?" The Viridians showed incredible courage and innovation during this crisis. They learned and adapted quickly. They proved themselves worthy by any reasonable measure. The room erupted in discussion. Lieutenant Turner watched from his position near the door as species that had never worked together began debating the meaning of advancement and civilization. The humans had unknowingly sparked something bigger than a simple rescue. "Order, please," the administrator called. "We must address the practical matters first. The human vessel Endeavor requires significant repairs." "Actually," Kira interrupted, standing up, "the Viridian Science Council has already voted. We will provide full repair facilities for the Endeavor at no cost. It's the least we can do." More murmurs, this time of surprise, a lesser species offering to help a more advanced one. This was unprecedented. Dr. Amanda Wells, who had been documenting the medical aspects of the rescue, shared her findings next. "During this incident, we discovered several areas where Viridian medical knowledge actually exceeds our own. By working together, both our species have already made advances that would have taken years to achieve alone." The Syrian representative, another species that had refused help, shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we were too hasty in our judgment of developing species." As the meeting continued, Lisa Martins noticed something interesting on her communication panel. "Captain," she whispered to Mason, "we're getting messages from other developing species. They want to know if humanity would be willing to establish diplomatic relations." Mason smiled slightly. The galaxy was changing, right here in this room. The old way of judging species solely by their technology was being challenged by something more basic: kindness, courage, and the willingness to help others. A young Viridian scientist stood up to speak. "Before this incident, we believed we needed to prove ourselves to the advanced species. But the humans showed us something different. They showed us that true advancement isn't about technology. It's about compassion, courage, and the willingness to help others grow." The administrator called for a short break, and the room filled with small groups discussing what they'd heard. Emily watched as species that normally kept their distance began talking to each other, sharing ideas and perspectives. "Look at that," she said to Michael. "We didn't just save one ship. We might have started changing how the whole galaxy thinks about development and cooperation." Chief Engineer Jack Thompson joined them, holding his tablet. "And it's not just talk. I've already gotten requests from 3 different species wanting to learn about our repair techniques. They're saying our primitive but effective methods might be useful in emergencies." The second half of the meeting focused on practical matters. New protocols were proposed for handling distress calls. Training exchanges were suggested. Species that had never worked together began planning joint rescue operations. As the meeting drew to a close, the administrator made an unexpected announcement. "In light of recent events, the Station Council has voted to establish a new emergency response center. It will be jointly operated by—" He paused significantly, "human and Viridian crews." The room burst into applause. Captain Mason looked at Kira, who seemed overwhelmed by this turn of events. "Ready to make some changes in the galaxy?" he asked her quietly. Kira's scales shimmered with determination. "Thanks to humans, we finally have the chance. We won't waste it." As they left the conference room, Emily noticed how different species were mingling, talking, sharing ideas. The rigid hierarchy that had ruled space for so long was beginning to crack, replaced by something new, something more equal, more cooperative. "You know what the best part is?" Michael said, watching the scenes of cooperation. "We didn't do this by showing off our power or technology. We did it by being human." The old ways were changing, and it had started with a simple choice to help those in need. 1 year had passed since the rescue of the Starweaver. The space station where it all ended had changed dramatically. Where once there were separate sections for different species based on their technological level, now there were mixed areas everywhere. The new Joint Emergency Response Center stood as its crown jewel. Kira stood before a class of young Viridians, her scales gleaming under the classroom lights. Behind her, a large window showed ships of various species working together in space. "And that's how humans taught us the most important lesson of all," she said to her eager students. "True greatness isn't measured by the power of your ships or the age of your civilization. It's measured by your willingness to help others." The classroom's door opened, and Captain Mason walked in, now wearing the uniform of the Joint Fleet. The students straightened in their seats, excited to see the human who had started it all. "Captain Mason." Kira greeted him warmly. "Perfect timing. Would you like to tell them about the rescue yourself?" Mason smiled. "Actually, I'm here to share some news. The 100th Joint Rescue Mission was just completed successfully. A Centaurian ship helped save a human colony vessel." The students buzzed with excitement. The same Centaurians who had once ignored distress calls were now saving others. Things really had changed. In another part of the station, Dr. Emily Brooks and Dr. Amanda Wells were working in the new Combined Medical Research Center. The walls displayed research results from 15 different species, all sharing their knowledge freely. "Remember when species used to hide their medical discoveries?" Amanda asked, reviewing data from a recent joint mission. "Now we're curing diseases that have plagued civilizations for centuries." Lieutenant Turner, now Commander Turner, entered the medical center. "You should see the new rescue ships," he said proudly. They're using a combination of human ingenuity and advanced alien technology, best of both worlds. The station's main control room had also transformed. Where once there had been strict divisions between species, now beings of all kinds worked side by side. Lisa Martinez, who had become the head of communications, monitored the emergency channels. "Another distress call coming in," she announced. 3 ships already responding. Human, Viridian, and Syrian, working together. Chief Engineer Jack Thompson, leading a mixed-species engineering team, had developed new repair techniques combining multiple technologies. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you stop worrying about who's more advanced and just focus on solving problems," he often said. In the station's grand hall, a memorial had been erected. It showed the Endeavour protecting the Starweaver from the solar flare. The plaque read in multiple languages, "The day everything changed, when humanity showed us a better way." Later that day, the station hosted a celebration for the anniversary of the rescue. Species that a year ago wouldn't even talk to each other now shared stories and food. Young officers from different worlds trained together, learning from each other's strengths. Captain Mason stood at the podium to address the gathered crowd. "1 year ago, we made a choice, a simple choice to help those in need. We didn't know it would change the galaxy. We just knew it was right." Kira joined him at the podium. "The humans taught us that the greatest power isn't in technology or weapons. It's in compassion, courage, and cooperation. They showed us that every species has something to teach and something to learn." The celebration was interrupted by a new distress call. A ship in trouble at the edge of known space. Without hesitation, crews of multiple species headed for their ships, ready to help. "See that?" Mason said to Kira as they watched the response. "No questions about who's more advanced or worthy. Just people helping people. People helping people," Kira repeated. Such a simple human phrase. But it changed everything. As the rescue ships launched, their crews working together with practiced ease, Emily stood at the window watching them go. A young Viridian student joined her. "Dr. Brooks," the student asked, "do you think humans knew they would change the galaxy when they saved the Starweaver?" Emily smiled. "No, we just did what we always do, help those in need." Sometimes the biggest changes come from the simplest actions. The legacy of that one rescue had spread far beyond a single act of bravery. It had created a new way of thinking, a new way of species working together. The old hierarchies were fading, replaced by partnerships and cooperation. As the day ended, the station's lights glowed warmly in space. Inside, humans and aliens worked together, learned together, and grew together. And somewhere out there, another rescue mission was starting. Another chance to prove that in space, just like on Earth, the most powerful force wasn't technology or advancement. It was simply people helping people.